Times when psychics helped solve crimes. On May 15, 1976, 14-year-old Susan Jacobson left her home to go to a job interview at an ice cream parlor, but she never came back. Susan's parents contacted the police, but the police said she probably just ran away with her boyfriend Dempsey Hawkins, and they refused to search for her. 2 weeks later, Susan's parents contacted a psychic, Dorothy Allison, to help with the case. Dorothy asked what the word Mar meant, claiming she saw it in red spray paint. She also envisioned an abandoned car, dual church steeples, the smell of oil, and claimed that Susan had been strangled to death by her boyfriend. Then 2 years later, 3 boys stumbled across Susan's body as they were hunting. At the site was the word Mar spray painted in red on a rock, dual church steeples, an abandoned car, and 2 oil drums which contained Susan's body. Plus, evidence at the scene showed that Susan had been strangled by her boyfriend Dempsey Hawkins, who was then sentenced to 22 years to life in prison.
Serial killer facts that will haunt your nightmares. Part 4. Researchers used AI deepfake technology to compile the faces of every serial killer into one man. Dude looks like a psychopath. If you look anything like that, you're probably a serial killer. Serial killer Ed Kemper was friends with the police officers who were investigating his murders. They all hung out at a bar together called the Jury Room. His nickname was Big Ed, and when he confessed to them, they thought it was a joke. Jeffrey Dahmer once made a drink laced with sleeping pills for a guest, but accidentally drank it himself. He later woke up to find that his soon-to-be victim had robbed him while he was sleeping. In 1906, a Moroccan murderer was sentenced to be walled up alive after he was found guilty of killing 36 women. His cries for help were heard for 2 days straight before he went silent.
Hey y'all, let's talk about the dead woman who solved her own murder. This right here is Teresita Basa. She came to America from the Philippines in the 1960s. She wanted a better life for herself in America. She moved to Chicago. She began studying music at first, and then she eventually became a respiratory therapist. Although things were going good for Teresita, her life was cut short by a killer. On February 21st, 1977, the fire department was called to Teresita's apartment because of the smell of smoke. That's when they made the awful discovery. Teresita was found deceased and nude and found under her mattress with a knife in her chest. For months, the police were looking for Teresita's killer. 6 months after her murder, an unlikely witness came forward. Dr. Chua, who worked with Teresita, came forward to the police and said that his wife was having visions of Teresita. One day when his wife was in a trance, she told him that she was Teresita Basa and that she knew who murdered her. So when he asked her who murdered you, she said Alan Showery. Alan Showery also worked with Teresita. When the police gathered all this information, they confronted Alan with this. At first, Alan denied any involvement in Teresita's murder, but later he confessed. Now this is the thing, Alan was served 14 years in prison, but he was let out on parole in 1983. Yes, I must admit, it is scary that her ghost revealed who her killer was, but at the same time, it's sad that she didn't get the justice that she deserved. Alright y'all, I'll be back to do more true crime videos for you guys.
Never ring on this guy's doorbell. In the small town of Midnight Falls, Michigan, there lived an old man named Jebediah Jenkins. His creepy house would send shivers down anyone's spine. One fateful night, a group of adventurous friends decided to play a prank on him. They dared Luke, a brave soul, to ding-dong ditch the old man's house. The first attempt was successful. The old man emerged, yelling and searching for the culprits. Emboldened by their triumph, the group dared Luke to do it again. Little did they know, their innocent game was about to take a terrifying turn. As Luke pressed the doorbell for the second time, the front door swung open ominously. Before anyone could react, the old man's bony hand shot out, snatching Luke and slamming the door shut. Panic consumed the remaining friends as they fled in their car, desperately trying to contact Luke but receiving no response. Realizing something was terribly wrong, the friends returned the next morning and called the police. The officers arrived at the eerie house, but no one answered the door. Concerned, they decided to investigate further. Inside, they discovered a scene straight out of a nightmare.
He murdered his great-grandmother for $133. In 2012, 13-year-old Antonio Barbo and his best friend Nathan Papp both murdered his great-grandmother in the most horrific way. On that day, Antonio's mother drove the kids to her grandmother's house, 78-year-old Barbara Olson, but she had no idea what they were about to do. The two teens tried to sneak into Barbara's house, but then she heard them, so she invited them inside. Once Barbara turned around, her great-grandson hit her with a hatchet. Barbara was hit 27 times and had wounds all over her hands and arms, indicating that she tried to defend herself. The teen stole Barbara's jewelry along with $155 and then used that money to buy drugs and pizza. They tried to drag Barbara's body into her car, but when they couldn't pick her up, they just left her in the garage. Barbara's body was found 2 days later by her own daughter, and the boys were arrested not long after. Nathan argues that he thought Antonio was just joking about murdering his own great-grandmother, and he only participated because he was afraid that Antonio would turn on him. Antonio's grandmother, who's also the victim's daughter, spoke out and said that her mother was not a vindictive person and she would have wanted Antonio to have another chance at life. And Antonio's defense really tried to argue that he had a brain injury back in 2009 and that's the reason he did what he did. But none of that mattered because both of these teenagers were sentenced to life in prison and are eligible for parole in 2048.
In the moonlight,
Just because I'm mean, here's that photo once again. Hi, my name is Ethan and here's everything you need to know in under 1 minute. This is the unknown man known as Mr. Cruel. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, he apparently had committed several CAs and allegedly unalived 13-year-old Carmen Chan. Police have described Mr. Cruel to be a very intelligent man as he has strategically planned each of his attacks to ensure that he would not get caught. Each time he kidnapped somebody, he would be very non-rushed and would speak with a soft voice. He even told a 14-year-old girl, quote, "My liberty, my freedom is more important than your life." I hate to say it, but it does appear he is still a free man and living in Australia. However, his last crime was committed on April 13th, 1991. Hopefully this man will be caught.
Quick warning, this story is extremely violent, so if you cannot handle that, please click off. I'm going to be telling you the story of Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta was a beautiful Japanese teenager who was pretty much the ideal girl. One day, the school bully admitted that he had feelings for her and she ended up rejecting him. He did not like that. On November 25th, 1988, him and 3 of his friends kidnapped Junko and held her captive in one of the boys' parents' house. Every time the parents came over, she had to pretend that she was dating the boy in fear of her life. But that wasn't it. For 44 days of a kidnapping, she had to handle the worst. She was by multiple men, over 100. She was beaten. Because they didn't feed her so much, she had to rely on eating cockroaches and drinking her own urine. Her eyelids were burnt. She was also thrown in a freezer for a couple of hours. Now at this point, she was practically begging the kidnappers to kill her, but they wouldn't. She even tried to escape once, and when they caught her, they burnt her hands and feet. One day, they challenged her to a game of cards, and when she ended up winning, they did not like that. They began to beat her and torture her to the point where her body went into shock and she passed away. To hide the evidence, they stuffed her body in a 55-gallon drum-filled concrete and disposed of it. They were caught and imprisoned, but because they were underage at the time, 18, 18, 17, and 16, they were charged as juveniles, and they are all now out of jail. It's disgusting.
The picture above shows the 180-year-old head of Diogo Alves, who was known as one of Portugal's most notorious serial killers. Alves started his life of crime after he would sneak into random farmers' homes and wait for them to arrive, and when they did, he would sneak attack them, murder them, and then throw their bodies over a nearby cliff. Alves was said to have committed around 70 murders, and after he was sentenced to death by hanging, scientists decapitated him and took his head to study the thought process of a serial killer. Not only did Alves murder 70 people that he didn't know, he also murdered his entire family, and still to this day, no one knows what triggered him to commit these horrific murders. And if you're still here, you probably want to know where you can visit it, and it is in Lisbon's Faculty of Medicine, so if you're ever in Lisbon, give the head a visit.
This woman created such disturbing videos that she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. This story is truly one of the worst things that I've ever covered here on TikTok, so if you have a weak stomach or you can't hear about animal cruelty, please keep scrolling. So this is Ashley Richards from Houston, Texas. In 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of producing and 1 count of distributing these disturbing videos. And once again, I'm going to warn you, you can keep scrolling at any time before we get into these details. So this all started in 2012 when PETA, or the group known as People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, contacted the Houston police about a video they had found online. This film was titled Ebony Kill Cat, and it depicted extremely sadistic and cruel acts being forced upon a kitten. So the police got into contact with the people from PETA, and they then sent them 20 additional videos. These videos depicted the sadistic torture of various animals, including kittens, a fish, pigeon, crayfish, mice, a rabbit, all being tortured with different things like high heels, knives, screwdrivers, and pliers. In the videos, the woman that appeared in them was wearing a Mardi Gras style mask, and she would talk suggestively to the people watching this torture. Yes, that meant that there were paying customers out there that were paying this woman to produce these absolutely horrific videos. I cannot share the details of some of these videos. You can actually find the information online through news articles, but I mean, I think I changed as a person after reading these articles. Eventually, though, the police were able to track Ashley's IP address, which led them to her suburban home in Houston. This is an example of one of the messages she shared with the client. I mean, just, ugh. That led them to Brent Justice and Ashley Richards. These were the 2 that were producing these videos and selling them on a website online. And Congress had recently passed a bill making this specific type of video material, otherwise known as crush, illegal. So thankfully they were arrested. Shockingly though, Brent Justice, after the trial, he was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. Shockingly though, Ashley, the woman who actually carried out these acts on camera, was only sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, personally, this is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about, and I definitely think she should have been in prison for a lot longer, but that's the justice system.
This is the world's largest ice city, and it only exists for 2 months a year before temperatures rise and it slowly melts away. Located in Harbin, China, the mind-blowing festival is filled with games, colossal ice structures, the world's longest ice slide, mazes, a cinema, ice hockey, skiing, snowbiking, and I don't know why, but even swimming. It's constructed every year by around 10,000 workers who get all of the ice for free from the Songhua River. It runs each year from January to early March, and this year they celebrated their 25th anniversary by setting a record for the amount of visitors. According to Chinese state media, over their 3-day New Year event alone, the festival had 6.6 million visitors, generating a staggering $826 million. The question is, who would you go here with?
Have you guys heard about the parents who planned the murder of their child? On July 16th, 2020, 17-year-old Bernadette Walker told her mother Sarah that her stepdad Scott had been sexually abusing her over a number of years. Bernadette's mother did not believe her and told her to go spend the night at her grandparents' house so that she can calm down. On July 18th, Scott went to pick Bernadette from her grandparents' house, but no one has heard from her or seen her ever since. Scott and Sarah reported Bernadette missing 3 days later, which was extremely suspicious to police. When questioned, Scott claimed that on his way home from picking up Bernadette, she jumped out of the car and ran away. But it was extremely hard for police to believe him because they found overwhelming evidence against him and Sarah. In a diary entry days before her death, Bernadette wrote that when she told her mother about the abuse, she called her a liar and threatened to kill her if she went to police. Police also discovered that Scott was a creep and had hidden cameras in the bathroom of the house to watch Bernadette. After further investigation, police noticed that Scott and Sarah were trying to cover up Bernadette's death by sending messages from her phone to give the impression that she was still alive and she just ran away. On July 18th, the day that Scott went to pick up Bernadette, his phone was off between 11:23 a.m. and 12:54 p.m., which is the time that prosecutors believe that Bernadette was murdered. When his phone reconnected, the first call he made was to Sarah, and that call lasted 9 minutes. Prosecutors believe that Scott called Sarah to tell her that he had just killed Bernadette and needed her help immediately to cover it up. Unfortunately, Scott Walker has yet to reveal what happened to Bernadette and where her body is. On September 10th, 2021, 51-year-old Scott Walker was charged for the murder of Bernadette and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years. And 38-year-old Sarah Walker was convicted of perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 6 years in prison.
This is the murder of James Bulger, one of the most heartbreaking true crime cases ever. This is James Bulger, and he was a 2-year-old toddler living in Liverpool, England with his parents. And on February 12, 1993, he was abducted from a shopping mall in Bootle, Merseyside. His father briefly let go of his hand while they were at the mall, and John Venables and Robert Thompson, who were both 10 years old at the time, approached James and lured him away. The abduction was caught on security cameras right here, and the footage showed the two boys leading James away. And after abducting James, John Venables and Robert Thompson took him on a harrowing journey through various locations in Liverpool, during which they subjected him to severe physical and emotional abuse. And you won't believe what these two 10-year-olds did to this 2-year-old boy. They took James to train tracks where they threw blue paint into his eyes, kicked him, stomped on him, threw bricks and stones at him. They placed batteries in his mouth and may have inserted them into his anus, although none were found there. They dropped a 22-pound fish plate on his head. They hit him in the head with a metal bar countless times, which caused 10 skull fractures. James Bulger suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be identified as the fatal blow. Thompson and Venables then laid James across the railroad tracks and weighted his head down with rubble, hoping that a train would hit him and his death would be ruled as an accident. After that, they left the scene, and James Bulger's body was then cut in half by the train. James's severed body was discovered by a group of children 2 days later, and the forensics testified that James Bulger died before he was struck by the train. John Venables and Robert Thompson were charged with the abduction, torture, and murder of James Bulger. The case received widespread media attention and was deeply emotional and a controversial trial. The boys were found guilty of the charges, and they were initially sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which allowed them to be held in custody for as long as necessary. They were sent to separate secure juvenile facilities but were eventually released on lifelong parole as young adults. The James Bulger case remains one of the most distressing and tragic true crime stories. Every time I come across this case, it just never sits right with me. I can never understand how these two 10-year-old boys could just take a 2-year-old boy away from his parents and then proceed to brutally torture him and kill him. This case is just sickening, and let me know your thoughts on it.
Caroline, you are in terrible danger.
You probably think this world is a dream come true, but you're wrong.
Now, a lot of people have been tagging me in this video, so I'm here to explain the backstory to this whole thing. Now, bear with me because this is a long one. Despite this case taking place 10 years ago, it is still talked about today a lot. Now, on June 1st, 2004, in the city of Sasebo, it looked like it was going to be just a regular, ordinary day. But nobody suspected that when they sent their child to class that day, it might be the last time they'd ever see them alive. Natsumi and Satomi were known as really good friends. They would share classes together and were even on the school basketball team. And what many people don't know is that the two had a feud a day before. Back in 2004, when social media wasn't a thing, people would make messaging boards to talk outside of school. This was also the birthplace of many internet problems such as cyberbullying. Satomi had said some mean things about Natsumi, such as commenting on her weight and telling her that she's a goody-goody in class. The next day, Natsumi went to school with a box cutter hidden in her pocket. The morning went as usual. The two friends went to class that morning until lunchtime came. Natsumi told Satomi to come follow her into an empty classroom. This is when Natsume lunged at her with the box cutter, cutting her arms multiple times, and then ending it with cutting her throat. Natsume then stayed in the classroom just to watch Satomi die. She stood above her while she bled out all over the classroom floor. When Satomi died, she kicked her in the head just to make sure she was dead. Then she went back to lunch covered in blood. When teachers and students saw Natsume's clothes and saw that it was covered in blood, they thought that she had hurt herself. Until she said, "This blood is not mine." The authorities were contacted and they arrived to the school in minutes, where they found Satomi dead on the classroom floor. Natsume was then immediately arrested and she was reportedly regretting her decisions. She was tried on September 15, 2004 and she was sent to a psychiatric ward for 4 years. She was diagnosed with hikikomori syndrome, which is basically an addiction to the internet and an additional depression. In 2013, she was fully released and she is now living in an unknown area in Japan with another identity. The story does not end there. Her case sparked a lot of interest in the media and she started building up a fan base. People started calling her Nevada Tom because a picture of her surfaced on the internet where she is wearing a University of Nevada sweater covered in blood and holding a box cutter. And fans have even gone as far to try and track her down but never could. Like and follow for more.